Good morning, Syracuse Garden Club. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm Ann Messenger. I am with the Central New York Lyme and Tick-Borne Disease Alliance. I'm so happy to have this garden club with us this morning. It looks like we have right now 25 participants, and I'm going to turn this over now to Brian Leydet, whom some of you have met already. Brian's an assistant professor at SUNY ESF. He's one of my heroes in all of this realm of learning about Lyme and tick-borne diseases. He knows everything there is about any tick born on this earth, I swear. And as I said earlier, every time I've listened to Brian, many times, I've come away learning something new. So while I go off and let some other people into this meeting, Brian, take it away. I'm unmuting you right now. Oh, go.
Let me share screens.
You okay with that? Yeah, good.
All right, thank you everyone. I appreciate the Garden Club having me this morning. My name, like Ann said, is Brian Leydet. I'm an assistant professor at SUNY ESF, and I'm also a board member at the Central New York Lyme and Tick-Borne Disease Alliance. Today I'm going to talk to you about ticks in the environment. I hear some of you may have heard this talk before. I've changed it a little bit. I've added some stuff about the disease itself because I usually have some counterparts with me and they talk about disease and I talk about the tick, but I'm pretty well versed in both those subjects. So let's talk today. Let me make sure So this slide is to show you the scale of ticks in the United States. And this is not every tick in the United States. This is only 5 of the most common human biting ticks. There's over 80 species of ticks in the United States, over 200 worldwide. However, humans are most likely to encounter a certain few species. And this slide is just to show you that they can look very different, especially to the trained eye. They can have different markings on their backs. They can have different colors. They can look different through the different life stages. So the bottom are the baby larva ticks. The next up are the nymphal ticks, and then followed by the adults. The top ones that are kind of nasty looking are the engorged ticks, the ones that have fed on blood. And they can have different sizes based on where they are in their level of engorgement. The 2 most common ticks you encounter in New York, especially in central New York, are the black-legged tick, also known as the deer tick. Right now, these are the ones you'll encounter, especially the female here who has this little rusty colored abdomen. In about a month, you'll start encountering the nymphal ticks, the poppy seed size ticks. And then you can encounter the American dog tick. And the American dog tick looks different. It's got these markings, especially at the adult stage. In the immature stages, the larva and the nymph are kind of hard to tell apart from the black-legged tick unless you're an expert. So why are we talking about ticks? I've heard from many people that 10 years ago, they weren't a problem here in upstate New York. Well, these ticks have changed everywhere. Humans have driven this change. And you can see in these 2 graphs, on the left, you have the US deer population. Deer are important hosts for ticks. They're the animal that the adult ticks feed on. And you need large animals for adult ticks to take large blood meals, to lay their eggs, to hatch thousands of babies. You can see by about 1900, we had almost eliminated the deer population across the United States. The white-tailed deer are a very important host in the Northeast for the black-legged tick. We realized that was not a good thing. And we brought back the deer. Bringing back the deer brought back ticks, brought back other problems. Not only did we almost eliminate deer by 1900, but we had almost eliminated our forests. And on the right, you can see a forest coverage of the United States. 1620 is around when Jamestown was settled or active. And you can see we had very large swaths of continuous forest throughout the eastern seaboard. By about 1910, many of that had been eliminated due to use for building, use for fuel, agriculture, those types of things. We realized that was a bad thing and wanted to change our ways, and we brought forests back. However, we didn't bring back forests like they were. We didn't bring back virgin forests that supported very diverse ecosystems. We brought back highly fragmented forests, surrounded by agriculture, surrounded by housing, and this doesn't support a diverse community, and this is very good habitat for ticks. Not only did humans change the landscape, humans change climate. So these are our climate zones. You're well familiar with this, being part of a garden club, and climate zones are very important. for growing different types of plants. And there's a reason I tell people that we can't have palm trees, banana trees, and orange trees in central New York, because we don't have the amount of growing degree days required for the tree and the fruit to develop. Same thing for the tick. The tick has a very, very long and interesting life cycle. They can live up to 2 years, and it takes about 1 to 2 years from a tick to go from the baby stage all the way to the adult stage. And during that time, most of their life is spent off the host. So they're not feeding on an animal, they're actually exposed to the environment. And just like our plants, they're exposed to different weather changes, temperature shifts, and ticks, like plants, have limits to where they can inhabit. And this is limited by something like a growing degree day. As climate change occurs, we're seeing these areas of habitat suitability expand. And so even one study up in Ontario has shown that ticks expand about 28 miles a year in Ontario. So they're expanding north, they're expanding east, they're expanding south, they're expanding west. All right, so what do ticks do to find a host? Ticks employ something we know as questing, and that's finding a blood meal, and they can have 2 strategies. The strategy here, shown by this female tick, is an ambush strategy. This is the type of strategy the majority of ticks in central New York employ, and they climb up vegetation or a leaf litter, and they wave out their hands, looking for a suitable host to pass by, and they'll grab on with hooks, and then climb up your body or an animal's body to find a place to feed. Excuse me. The other strategy is a hunter strategy. You can see right here, this is a Lone Star tick with a dot on her back. These ticks actually can chase down their prey, and they'll sense a prey coming by, and they'll chase you down. Some can run up to 3 meters while trying to chase a prey down. These ticks are not endemic to upstate New York. However, we do see random occurrences of them, and they are highly located in downstate New York, so they're on their way. So what do ticks look for when they're trying to find a host? They have a couple different cues, things like odors or CO2 from an animal's breath, or ammonia or sweating from your lactic and butyric acid when you sweat. Heat, seeing heat around, this slide didn't come out like I wanted to. Seeing heat, a heat signature from a warm-blooded animal, vibrations from an animal walking, and even some ticks respond to a host sound like feeding cattle or barking of a dog. This is an example of ticks aggregating for this. These slides are backwards. Aggregating for a pheromone. So these are larval ticks on a twig, and basically the ticks release a cologne or a fragrance, and the other ticks kind of hang out there around that fragrance, and they all employ the same strategy, looking for a host. This is an example of dog's breath, dogs barking. Some ticks actually seek out dead animals like deer, not for a blood meal, but they'll hang around the deer carcass waiting for scavengers to come by, like coyotes, and they'll attach to a coyote when they're feeding on the deer. And then radiant heat, something like this. The ticks can detect differences in heat from a warm-blooded animal versus the background. All right, so where do ticks live? Ticks live in very different places. I'm going to talk mainly about the black-legged tick because that's the tick we're most concerned with in central New York. And you can see here that ticks love forests. They love canopy cover. They love leaf litter. They love leaf litter because it produces a microenvironment that's very warm. It's very moist because of the decaying leaf matter. And they basically live under that leaf matter in the soil and then come out when conditions are right to quest for their host. But where ticks live doesn't mean you're going to encounter a tick there. A lot of us are not going out in the middle of a forest. We're sticking to trails. We're sticking to our yard. And that's where you're going to encounter the ticks. It doesn't mean the ticks aren't out there in the forest, but that's not where humans are. So we need to think about where ticks and humans are. So if you're out on a trail, you're going to encounter ticks on the edges of the trail, where there's leaf litter, where there's twigs and branches for the ticks to climb up on. When you're in your yard, you're going to encounter the ticks closer to the forest, so the edge of the yard. You're less likely to encounter that tick in the middle of your yard. Now it's not unlikely, but it's less likely than when you're on the edge of your yard. And studies show that in New York residents, about 70% of them experiencing tick bites will pick them up in their own yard. So that's where we're educating people. You need to be aware. If you do go out to Green Lakes, obviously you need to be aware, but you also need to be aware when you're working in your yard and around the edge of your yard. So like I said earlier, ticks can survive for up to 2 years. I kind of explain this as like a lawnmower. A tick's like a lawnmower in that it needs gas to work. Unlike a lawnmower that you can fill up multiple times, ticks can only be filled up 3 times. They take 3 blood meals. A mosquito can take a lot of blood meals, and they can be active, not longer, but more active more often. Ticks take 3 blood meals. Once that blood meal's gone, they literally die if they don't find their next blood meal. So if you don't refill your lawnmower, it will die eventually. What happens in the winter? People ask me all the time, we had a bad winter. How does that, didn't have a bad winter, how does that affect ticks? Well, ticks really don't care. They're hanging out under that leaf litter, under that soil. If we have a good snowpack, I say ticks live in igloos. They have that ice cover. It's very warm. They're not climbing out of the snow. They have a very different microclimate than we're experiencing, you know, 3 meters above or 2 meters above. You can imagine in this situation, you have people out there in hiking, making what looks like to be a campsite. You're not going to find ticks hanging out on top of the snow there. They're underneath the leaf litter and happy and just waiting out the winter. However, if you do see ground cover, you can have activity for ticks. So these gentlemen out there hiking need to be concerned about ticks because ticks can be active even if there's snow on the ground. They just need that bare area to get out of the leaf litter. Ticks feed on very different hosts. The black-legged tick employs is a generalist. It feeds on a lot of different types of hosts. So the what you take from this slide, it's really important, is that the smaller the tick, the smaller the host. The larger the tick, it needs a larger host. So the larval tick, the nymphal tick, like to feed on things like deer mice, white-footed mice, voles and shrews, chipmunks, even birds. So you can see this is a song sparrow here that has about 36 ticks. You can see one right here on the eye that we captured in a study we did here in Onondaga County. And then the adult ticks need the larger animals. So the adult ticks preferentially feed on deer, but they can also feed on things like fox and other large animals. It's important to note that I say here that deer do not carry Lyme disease. They can actually, their blood eliminates Lyme disease when it enters their body. Deer are important because they feed the adult tick. Without the deer or the other larger animals, you wouldn't have the adult tick because the adult ticks do not feed on chipmunks or mice. All right, when we think about the tick, there's 4 different life stages. The first life stage is the egg. So this is an adult female tick laying about 1,000 to 3,000 eggs, depending on the species of tick. The eggs hatch into larvae. It's important to note that larvae are not infected with Lyme. It doesn't mean you can't get a disease from a larval tick because there are certain diseases that larval ticks can spread, but not the most common one we see in central New York. Larvae are very small. You can see them in terms of a penny. They're about the size of the 0 on a penny. So that's very, very small. And they do hang out in bunches like this, aggregates, waiting for a blood host to stop by. And after a blood meal, the larvae hatch into nymphs. The nymph is bigger than the larva, but smaller than the adult. The nymph is the life stage most often implicated in Lyme disease transmission because it's the first stage that can transmit, and it's very small. It's about the size of a poppy seed. And you may have seen this, but this is a poppy seed muffin released by the CDC, and they decided to put 5 nymphal ticks on this muffin and ask people to spot the ticks. If you have expert eyes like I do, you can see them right off the bat, but we'll zoom in. Here are the 5 ticks. This is tick number 1, tick number 2, tick number 3, tick number 4, tick number 5, and they're basically right here. So they are about the size of a poppy seed muffin. And if this turns you off the poppy seed muffins, I'm sorry. After the nymph takes a blood meal, they can molt into an adult tick. The adult tick, like I said earlier, really requires larger animals like deer, but they do feed on humans. You can get an adult tick attached to you right now. I can go out in my yard, probably not today, but maybe later today and find some ticks. The adult ticks can vary in size depending on where they are in their blood meal. This is the adult female black-legged tick and the different stages of the blood meal based on feeding. So probably about 48 hours here to about 5 days fed here. All right, so why do we care about ticks? And this is a slide I put together to show you that tick-borne diseases are becoming more and more common in central New York, northern New York, and western New York. And this is Lyme disease rate per region of New York. So each graph shows the rate of disease per 100,000 people. So if you see it 50, it's 50 cases of Lyme disease per 100,000 people. And you can kind of see that throughout the years, the disease is going up in many regions around New York. If I put that into numbers for you to see, this is the percent change. over the last 10 years. So look in downstate New York that we once considered really endemic for disease, we're actually seeing a decrease in rates of disease in the past 10 years. So even in the capital region, we've seen a 56% decrease in change. Look out west, very different story. So in the southern tier, you've got an 817% increase. In central New York, we've seen about a 439% increase in rates of Lyme disease in the last 10 years. So this is a problem that we need to deal with, and we're really far behind the game on this one. So if you get bitten by a tick, what do? Well, you need to monitor yourself for symptoms of disease. And the problem with the tick bite and the diseases it causes is they're very general. So the general tick-borne illness symptoms include things like fever, tiredness, muscle pain, fatigue, headache, confusion, chills, and sometimes nausea and vomiting. You just don't feel good. You feel like you have the flu, but it's not flu season. So what do? Well, you should go to the doctor. If you've been in an area where you potentially were exposed to a tick, you should tell your doctor. If you were working in your yard, that's an area you could be exposed to a tick. If you're hanging out in the parking lot, not going to be exposed to a tick. So you may have the cold, you may have COVID-19. But again, it's very general, and it's something your doctor should be aware about, and you should help inform your treatment path or diagnostics path. I'll talk a little bit about Lyme disease because that's the most common disease we see in upstate New York. So clinical Lyme disease presents in various ways. There's an early stage of disease where some folks may get a characteristic skin rash we call erythema migrans. A lot of people call it the bullseye rash, but a lot of times it's not a bullseye. So here's a really good picture of the different types of rashes you can see. So here's your classic bullseye rash, but this is not that common. You could have just a full-on blue-red lesion, a uniformly red lesion, multiple lesions, maybe a blistered lesion that's completely filled in. We need to think about the name of the rash. The name of the rash is the erythema migrans. And if you translate that, the etymology of that is a red expanding rash. Doesn't say anything about a bullseye, doesn't say anything about clearing. It's an expanding red rash. So I tell people, if you get a tick bite and you notice a rash, take a Sharpie marker, draw a Sharpie around that rash. If you wake up the next day and that rash is bigger than your marker, that is an erythema migrans. It's an expanding red rash. And that's clinically diagnostic, especially in upstate New York for Lyme disease. These rashes develop about 7 days after the tick bite. If left untreated, most cases of Lyme disease in the United States can lead to things like arthritis. That's 60% of cases will develop a clinical arthritis in a major joint like a hip, a knee, an elbow. The disseminated disease for Lyme disease causes, like I said, major joint arthritis, but it can cause a life-threatening condition known as third-degree heart block, and this can drop a person dead right there. There are clinical cases of healthy teens to early 20-year-olds just dropping dead from this severe cardiac manifestation of Lyme disease. And then there's neurological conditions that Lyme disease can cause, including stroke-like symptoms like this woman right here, known as Bell's palsy, and this is a transient facial paralysis, or things like meningitis, which is swelling of the meninges, the protective layer of your brain. So that can cause things like focal disturbance, sensitivity to light, or severe headaches. So the best thing to do to not get Lyme disease or other tick-borne disease is to prevent yourself. I know a lot of people harp on diagnostics and treatment, but you know what? If you don't get bit, you don't have to worry about diagnosis. You don't have to worry about treatment. And this is the strategy I employ. I don't like to get bit. I rarely get bit by ticks, knock on wood, and I've never had a tick-borne disease, knock on wood. So I can tell you it works. You need to wear proper clothing when you're out in tick environments. This is a picture I took off the internet of a female collecting ticks, and she's not in proper clothing. This is another picture I took off that's more resemblance of what I wear when I'm collecting ticks, especially for research purposes. But I don't expect the normal person to wear a Tyvek suit out in the open. You get a lot of weird stares and people asking you questions. But you can do simple things like wearing light, long sleeves and pants, and tucking your pants into your socks and your shirt into your pants. I said earlier that the black-legged tick, or ticks in upstate New York, use an ambush-style questing strategy. So they grab onto you as you walk by. That usually means your lower extremities. Why do you find ticks on your hairline, or on your waist, or on your back, or on your chest? Well, it's because they've climbed up there, and they've taken time and found a nice spot to feed. So if you tuck your socks into light-colored pants, you may see them climbing up. If you don't have your socks tucked into your pants, they get under your pants and they climb up basically unnoticed. So this is a very important step. You can use things like personal caricides or bug spray. There's two different types, or a couple of strategies you can take here. One strategy I really recommend is permethrin, and you can get this at any big box store, Walmart, Dick's, Target even has this. But this is not something you use on your skin. This is what you use on your clothes or your garden shoes or your socks. This is great. You can spray your shoes, you let it dry, and this is very effective at keeping ticks off you. I use it for my shoes when I'm out in the yard. I also use it on my kids' shoes. For your skin, now, one thing I have to say, because Ann will kill me if I don't, is that when this is wet, before you spray it, it is toxic to cats. It was very toxic to cats. But once you spray it and dry it, it can get wet again. It will not be a problem for your little furry friends. So just note that. So apply these sprays as indicated on the label. For your skin, we recommend things like DEET or picaridin-based sprays, at least 20%. These work very well. They also help against biting insects like mosquitoes. And then I've provided a website here. It's an EPA link where you can find the right repellent that you want to use based on how long you're outside, what you want to repel, what ingredients you're okay with. And we really recommend using an EPA recommended or proven spray, because some of these other sprays may not have any evidence that they actually work, and we just don't want you getting into disease. Even if you practice all that, after you come inside, you should perform a tick check. You should shower shortly after coming inside, because that will wash off any ticks that aren't attached. It also lets you look for ticks in the places they may be. We recommend people take their clothes they were in and throw them in a hot dryer for 15 to 20 minutes. That'll kill any ticks that were on your clothes. And then what can you do around your house? Because we're all around our house. This weekend was wonderful, and the next 7 days are gonna be gorgeous. So I'm sure we're gonna be out there working in the yard. I know I will be. So what can you do around your home to keep yourself safe and your family safe? I like to say you can create no-go zones. These are zones that have areas of high or potentially high tick potential. So the edges of your yard. These are areas you tell your kids, your grandkids, your significant other, we don't like to go there unless we have to. How do you identify these zones? Well, you could do things like putting a wood chip or rock path to separate these zones from highly used areas. And this is a visual no-go zone area. Things like wood piles, which a lot of us have in upstate New York, are great homes for rodents. So we tell people to keep them away from your house, away from areas that you're really active in, like your kids' play set or your garden. Put that in towards the no-go zone. Put that on a rock pile or wood chips. Why a rock pile and wood chips? Well, because ticks are very susceptible to drying out. So they don't like direct sun and they need moisture. And these types of things are not good areas for ticks, and they'll dry out before they can attach to you. Place children's play sets or areas they play in sunny areas, far away from those no-go zones. So you have to worry less about tick attachment. Now, again, even if you do all this, you still need to think about ticks, because they can be located in the middle of your yard. They just won't live as long. Removing leaf litter is really important, because that's where ticks really like to survive. Creating open and sunny areas by pruning your trees to let in sunlight will help control ticks. Keeping your lawns mowed and trim your shrubs and your walkways and patios. Again, letting that sun penetrate and dry out those ticks that could potentially be there. Surrounding any of your gardens with stone or gravel or like a hardscape that are not conducive to allowing ticks to set up shop. And then keeping the deer out. The deer, like I said, one female tick can lay about 3,000 eggs. If a deer is carrying 50 female ticks, you're talking 150,000 little baby ticks. We recommend fencing. It needs to be at least 7.5 foot high. Deer can actually jump up to 8 feet, but 7.5 foot really deters them. 8 foot's a big fence. Selecting things like deer-resistant plants for your landscape. And I know I have a short period of time here. We have a list, and you can go to any nursery and get a list about deer-resistant plants. These are good things to keep deer out of your yard. And then removing exotic invasive species, things like Japanese barberry and honeysuckle. These are species that deer love to browse and ticks love to hang around because they produce the right environment underneath. So anything you're seeing deer browse, you need to get rid of those. Let's say you do get a tick despite all of this, and it can happen. What do? Well, you should remove that tick. So I tell people, take a fine point tweezers like demonstrated here, grasp the tick as close to the skin as possible, and just pull straight out. The tick will pull out. Their teeth, their hypostome is what they call it. It's like a needle. It has these barbs, kind of like a fishing hook, and it has hundreds of these little barbs, and it helps the tick attach. They also release a cement, a kind of attachment cement that keeps them stuck to your skin. But they will come out. I've removed thousands and thousands of these from animals. Let's say the head does break off. Don't worry, don't be digging at it. Wash it with ethanol, use an antibiotic cream on it like Neosporin. That head piece will come out, your immune system will kick it out. After you remove the tick, don't flush it down the toilet, don't burn it. Put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it in the freezer. That'll kill it. In case you do develop symptoms, and you can take it to your doctor. Or after this whole COVID-19 thing, I have a colleague at Upstate University that does free tick testing. So once his lab's back up and running, you can mail the tick to the Thangamani lab. I produce the website here, and they'll test the tick for you, and you can get your results. And that may help inform your clinician if you do develop symptoms. Now, again, that's not for diagnosis, but it may be another check for you to go to your doctor with. But importantly, you need to monitor yourself for signs of tick-borne disease. And remember, those signs are very vague. It's just not feeling good, feeling down. And you need to correlate that with, oh, I was out in the yard, or I found that tick on me. Maybe I need to call my doctor. Go to your doctor if you develop symptoms and let them know that you think you may have been bitten by a tick, or, hey, doc, I got my tick right here. Lastly, I say visit the CNYLymeAlliance.org. That's our nonprofit that I'm a board member on, and Ann is as well. We have a lot of great information there for you to help prevent yourself and your loved ones from being bit, and what to do if you do get bit. With that, hopefully I was right on time. I'll take any questions or just have a nice lively discussion. And this is myself and my little kid Lucas. We got 2 ticks on here in the backyard. He's helping me collect. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Brian. We did have one. Now we have 2 questions. One was about Sarah Vonen's lab, the Thangamani lab. I saw a few people jotting down the address of that lab. Let me repeat it for you, or maybe Brian, you could just jump back. Yeah.
There you go.
The Thangamani lab, sadly now, is hibernating because of COVID-19. Sarah Vonen Thangamani was landed last year, thankfully, by Upstate, who brought him in. He brought his entire 5-member team up from Texas to live here in Central New York and do his pretty amazing research. Along the way, he decided, maybe I can start testing ticks for people. Started that lab, that became one of the functions of the lab. I don't think Brian mentioned this. If you do find a tick, pull it off, as Brian said, put it in a plastic bag and put it in the freezer. And hang on to it until that lab reopens. When it does reopen, Sarah Vonen will give you instructions for how to send that tick in, follow those instructions, send it in. He'll assign you and your tick a number, test it, and then you'll get an alert and the results of that test. You and your tick will have a particular number. It's pretty slick how he does that. So other questions?
Don't wait if you do develop symptoms for test results. If you do develop symptoms, go to the doctor.
Absolutely.
Testing can take some time, especially in the midst of tick season when they're getting hundreds and hundreds of ticks.
Yes, and I'm going to get to your question, Lisa. Your questions, Lisa and Bonnie, in a moment. I did go to the doctor. I was misdiagnosed, like so many people, like so many people's doctors. A lot of primary care physicians just don't know about the signs of Lyme disease or other tick-borne diseases. So the smarter you can get and the more education we and others do of primary care physicians, the more they will come along. Sometimes it's just up to us to educate even our doctors. Lisa Sasser says, I've heard that tests can be inconclusive. Please comment. You want to take that, Brian?
I do, and guess what? I've got a slide for you. All right, so let's talk about that. Diagnosis of Lyme disease is very complicated. It really should be based on clinical signs and history of a tick bite. There is a serological test, screening. It's called a two-tier test. This is an example of what the second tier of that test looks like. It's a Western blot. These are actually some tests I ran on some mice that I infected with Lyme disease during my PhD, and this is what the blot looks like. It is highly ineffective in the early stages. So in early disease stages, when you just have a rash, only about 29 to 40% of people are going to get positive. As disease gets later and later without treatment, you have more people have a positive test. The way the test works is it detects antibodies. It's what we call a indirect test. So it doesn't actually detect the bacteria that causes the disease. It detects your response to that bacteria. And as we know, everybody responds to infection differently. So if you don't have a good immune system, you may not have a robust enough antibody response to have a detectable test. This is a really sobering statistic here. In really acute disease, so right after you get bit and you become infected, if you go to the doctor within 1 week, only 9% of people will have a positive test. So that's really important. Early diagnosis, early treatment is essential for Lyme disease. This test is not good early on. So you need to be aware that you were potentially exposed, and you need to recognize your symptoms as potentially being tick-borne, and your doctor needs to recognize that as well. So it's really important that if you think you got bit by a tick, and if you have the tick, to inform your clinician you think you may have a tick-borne disease. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Brian. Susan Clark, I'm not sure if we've satisfied this question. What does the saved tick tell you?
So the saved tick tells you a couple things. It tells you what species of that tick it is. Remember, there's about 80 species in the United States. Each of them transmit different types of diseases. So if you're bitten by an American dog tick, I can say, well, you're not going to get Lyme disease, but it may have something that we know as Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So it can help inform your diagnosis if you have a tick-borne disease. Lyme disease is spread by the black-legged tick. Other ticks spread other diseases like ehrlichiosis and other diseases. So diseases are somewhat specific to tick species, and that can help inform what the doctor should be looking for.
Right. We had a lot of conversation in how to name this new organization last year. And I love brevity. I'm a one-page person, put it on one line, and I just wanted to call it the Lyme Alliance. And our scientist and doc said, no, got a lot of pushback on that because it's not just Lyme, it's tick-borne diseases. Brian, a tick can carry up to how many? One tick can carry up to how many diseases?
The black-legged tick is probably the most notorious, and that's up to 7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, moving on to questions. Bonnie has 2. Bonnie Jones. Ehrlich is coming to spray monthly. Will that be sufficient to keep ticks away? That's her first question, Brian.
So I can't give you a definitive answer. I'm a scientist. Definitive answers are not conducive to science. I will say it will help knock down ticks, definitely. The commercial sprays are highly effective. It depends on what spray they're using. Again, they're not so, they can harm other organisms as well, so I don't promote spraying. But again, it's a risk reward. You know, how much risk do you have? You know, is there high risk for disease? You know, where do you set that up? Yes, spraying does work very well. There are there's some natural alternatives that need to be sprayed more often. The synthetic chemicals that are manufactured are usually a 2 spray application can work and have been shown to be effective at knocking down ticks.
Okay, Brian, you're going to be conflicted when I ask you Bonnie's second question. What is Biffen XTS and where do I get it?
Bifenthrin. Biffen is a generic name for bifenthrin, which is a synthetic acaricide, which is a synthetic chemical. This is a pesticide that can be used in the environment. There's a lot of them out there. You have to search your own. I'm not going to tell people, because this should be applied by a licensed person doing this type of stuff, or somebody that knows what they're doing, because these synthetic chemicals are very toxic to the environment. There are regulations in New York State, especially with use around waterways or any water sources, because these things can pollute the aquatic ecosystem and kill fish. They transport, we call transport through the soil. They also will eliminate pollinators. So you will kill all your bees and your butterflies, as well as any other insect if used in an improper way. So, you may want to reach out to your local pest control folks and have them inform you on treatment of your yard.
Okay, again, Brian's a scientist at ESF, and I'm sure his colleagues at ESF would not even like him talking about something that's so toxic for the environment. More questions coming in. Jean, it looks like Jean Jackson, my tennis buddy. What about a dry tick tiller? I just had the lawn covered. Will it work?
My guess is that's probably diatomaceous earth, would be my guess. Diatomaceous earth dries out the tick. It does work. However, it's, again, it needs to be reapplied because it will wash away. You may be talking about granule as well, and that can work as well. I believe it's a synthetic. It may be bifenthrin in the granules or a pyrethroid. And again, it will work. They will knock down ticks. But again, follow your directions. If you're not comfortable with it, hire a professional. They're educated and know what they're doing to protect our environment, because that's ultimately we don't want to harm other things. We have to work in collaboration with the environment, because every time we mess something up, the earth hits back. And the prime example is Lyme disease, right? We deforested, we killed all the deer, we brought them back, and Earth said, here you go, here's Lyme disease.
Yeah. Okay, the questions keep coming in, Brian. Here's Lisa Sasser again. I've heard that a human immunization may be in the works. Do you have any information about this?
Yeah, so there was a human Lyme vaccine called Lymerix in the early 2000s, late 1990s. It was an effective vaccine. There were concerns about it causing arthritis, autoimmunity arthritis. There were a couple laboratory studies in guinea pigs that backed up that concern. The FDA ruled there wasn't actually human examples of this arthritis. However, the vaccine was pulled from the market because of bad press, as well as it was right around the anti-vaxxer movement with the MMR vaccine. However, there are a couple companies that are revamping the same vaccine. They've taken out any of these questionable design flaws that may have resulted in this autoimmune arthritis. And I believe these trials are entering phase 3, which is high number of patients and testing for efficacy. So I would say in the next 5 to 10 years, if all goes well, there should be a vaccine on market.
Jennifer Wardell, what if, I'm not sure I understand this, but I think, what if, and her question reads, what if any animals eat ticks? I'm thinking she means do any animal. I'm wondering if she's thinking about possums.
Your cat or your dog eats the tick that's on them. So certain animals do eat ticks. I'll answer both ways. Certain animals do eat ticks. Animals will groom ticks off them. Chickens will eat ticks off the ground. Now, they won't control your tick population, but they will feed on ticks. There are certain birds that actually pick ticks off of cattle. They're called oxpeckers, and they'll peck the ticks off the cattle. So there are animals that do feed on ticks. And what if your dog or your cat eats a tick? They won't get a tick-borne disease per se, like Lyme disease or there's others, but they could get a worm infection. So there are certain arthropods like fleas, ticks, that if they're carrying a nematode or a worm, it can cause a GI worm infection. Not super common. And there is another disease called another cytotoxozoan, I believe, or hepatotoxozoan. It's a protozoan, kind of like a malaria-like organism, that if the tick is infected with it and the dog eats it, they can get that. But that disease itself is more common in the southern United States. So short answer, very unlikely your animal's going to get sick from eating a tick up here.
Thank you. Oh, Judy Poltonson asking a question that is on so many people's minds who've suffered from Lyme and other diseases, certainly on my mind. Brian, does the CDC recognize long-term chronic Lyme now?
So this is a double, I wouldn't say double-edged sword. This is an interesting question. And what I want to do is I'm going to talk from a public health aspect, because my upbringing was public health. I have an MPH. And the CDC is a public health agency. And, people like to harp on the CDC, and yeah, there's a lot of problems. There's problems everywhere in society. CDC is responsible for surveillance of disease, and surveillance of disease is very different from diagnosis of disease. I can tell you that the CDC doesn't collect numbers for long-term chronic Lyme. The CDC doesn't collect numbers for a lot of diseases. There are certain diseases that are surveyed in a population, and you can't surveil every disease because it would just be a huge task. It's a double-edged sword. The CDC has a strict definition for Lyme disease surveillance to help inform numbers. That definition is based on a bunch of epidemiologists getting in a room and talking about it. So it's argued on every 4 years or 5 years, or any time an epidemiologist wants to argue it. And that's different from what a doctor understands and can diagnose. So it really is two separate things. The CDC doesn't inform diagnosis, they inform surveillance, and the doctors diagnose based on their knowledge, education, and skills. So there are some doctors that don't believe in chronic Lyme disease. There are some doctors that do believe in chronic Lyme disease. And there is evidence for and against both. So again, this is me as a scientist saying it's a gray area and there needs to be more research on it.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Lisa Sasser, again, is your presentation available so I can show it to my family? We are recording this, Lisa, and I'm going to, when we finish with this meeting, I'm going to we'll do all of the stuff with the recording and upload it to our website, and our social media platforms too, which I'm going to show you toward the end of this presentation. That's it on the questions right now from the chat. I think I've hit them all. If you have other questions, either raise your hand like this or unmute yourself or type in a question in the chat, please. And I'm looking through here, none others. I don't see any others. So Brian, if you could give the screen back to me, I'm going to show you all. Again, we're recording this, so it'll be on our recording. Oops. This is our website. These are our social media platforms. We've also just added YouTube. You can find us on YouTube. We've just launched that in the last week and a half and already have some videos up there. We would love to have you like us on Facebook here, or maybe you're more active on Instagram. whoops, this is Instagram. Maybe some of you tweet. And if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be great. Zaylee, if I came away from this meeting and I didn't ask you to think about donating to us, Zaylee would have my hide. So this is National Lyme Disease Awareness Month, and we are putting the push on all of this, getting all of this information out as we are in that national month, and also hovering at the edge of what is expected to be the biggest tick season ever. So that, I guess, is going to be my question. Brian, can you speak to that? Biggest tick season ever? Why? What do we think about? Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Every year is going to be the biggest tick season ever. So next year is going to be bigger than this year, is going to be bigger than the year previous. Ticks are established here. They're not going away. And as time progresses, every year, it's a great thing. I get to say every year it's the worst tick season ever. Keeps my job. So, once ticks are established, it's hard to get rid of them. That's why we need, and not we, but other areas need to employ strategies known as, that I termed slow the spread. I know that was termed during COVID, but I termed it before COVID. The only way to stop these ticks and these diseases are to stop the ticks from actually establishing in new areas. So areas that are free of these ticks, we need to stop establishment, because once they're established, it's almost impossible to get rid of them. So that's my little soapbox there.
Good. Thanks. Some people have said to me, why is this alliance up and running anyway? It happened that I went to my Lyme doctor, Dr. Chris Paulino at Upstate, invited me a year and a half ago to go to what was essentially a Lyme summit at Cornell. 5 higher ed institutions, Cornell and SUNY's ESF, SUNY Upstate and SUNY Binghamton. And I've told people this, I was the only normal person in the room. The rest were these heavy duty scientists and doctors and higher ed big muckety mucks. And it turns out, in one time after another, a scientist would stand up in one part of the room and say, I've got these grants, I am doing this great work, I've got outcomes, but my big challenge is I don't have patience. And a doctor would say, seriously, I need your outcomes. I need what the results of your research is. I have the patience, let's talk. Again and again, it happened in that room. It became apparent that a lot of people just weren't talking with each other. I said to Chris, we got to do something. Long story short, now we have this board, we have an alliance, we have doctors, nurses, scientists, community leader types in the room, talking with each other, learning from each other. If we do this right, and we are doing it right, by the end of 5 years, we will be the go-to place in the United States for Lyme and tick-borne disease resources. The people we have in place in Central New York are that good. And now they're starting to talk with each other. I said that 5-year thing to Montage Dewan, who is the president of Upstate, or president of Upstate, interim president of Upstate. And he turned to me and said, 5 years, it's going to be 2 years. So we're very happy again that you all have been with us this morning, sometimes doubly. So thank you for joining us. We're going to end the meeting now. I see no more questions. Brian, thank you so much. Again, you're my hero.
Thank you.
We will thank you all for joining us. Susan and Bonnie, thank you so much. And Zaylee, thank you so much for helping us set this up. And I'm going to upload this on our website and our social media platforms, and go out and garden. It's going to be a gorgeous week. Thanks all.
Anne?
Yes.
Would you please make sure everyone knows the Garden Club members to stay on?
Yes, I will.
Yeah, thank you.
And Susan, I'm going to stop recording now so you can have your meeting.
Thank you, and I'll text you when we're finished.
Okay,
But
Thanks.
you'd be welcome to join us if you'd like.
okay, thank you.
Thank
Brian,
you.
thanks.
Hi, everyone. Everyone's still muted.